67.3% of young South Africans are currently without employment, while local infrastructure crumbles beneath decades of administrative decay. In the Vemba district, over 70% of municipal roads lie completely ruined, forcing ordinary citizens to swerve dangerously like drunkards across the home territory of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Into this landscape of civic neglect stepped Julius Malema, delivering an explosive address in Thohoyandou that converted daily domestic frustration into an uncompromising assault on the seat of power. Declaring 2026 a pivotal year of reckoning, the leader of the economic freedom fighters posed a fundamental question to the nation. If power changes hands, but not structure, has anything really changed? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates, show your support with a comment, or a subscription. It means more than numbers, it keeps the story alive. In the heart of Limpopo, inside the bustling rural hub of Thohoyandou, a political storm erupted during the historic gathering of the economic freedom fighters. The year 2026 has brought South Africa to a critical juncture, and Julius Malema chose this specific arena to deliver a devastating blow against the governing African National Congress. Thohoyandou is not merely a geographic location within the Vemba district. It is deeply symbolic, serving as the ancestral hearth and cultural stronghold of President Cyril Ramaphosa. By launching the EFF Manifesto and celebrating the 13-year anniversary of his movement on this exact soil, Julius Malema was not simply seeking a large audience. He was deliberately invading what was long considered one of the safest strongholds of the ruling party, turning local infrastructure failures into a national trial of governance. The response from the African National Congress was swift and telling. Understanding the profound symbolism of the rally, the governing party hastily organized a competing Mandela Legacy rally at the nearby Moarella Stadium on the very same weekend. This strategic counter-mobilization demonstrated that the ANC leadership recognized the immediate threat. They could not afford to allow Julius Malema to dominate the political dialogue in Vemba without resistance. Yet, when observers compared the visual reality of both venues, the contrast was stark and undeniable. The ANC gathering drew heavily from an older generation. Citizens whose political allegiance was forged in the crucible of the liberation struggle and solidified over decades of historical loyalty. In contrast, the economic freedom fighters filled their arena with a sea of vibrant, passionate young South Africans. This generational divide represents far more than a difference in rally demographics. It exposes a fundamental shift in South African political consciousness. For older voters, the ANC remains the sacred vehicle that brought down institutional apartheid. For the youth born after 1994, historical credentials offer little comfort when faced with immediate economic collapse. In the Vemba district, more than 70% of local roads have suffered severe structural degradation, forcing commuters to weave dangerously across ruined tarmac simply to avoid catastrophic damage to their vehicles. When Julius Malema stood before the roaring crowd and mocked these broken roads, pointing out that sober drivers are forced to navigate like drunkards just to survive the journey, the laughter in the stadium was laced with bitter anger. Julius Malema directly challenged the notion that cultural identity should shield political leadership from scrutiny. He forcefully argued that shared linguistic heritage cannot substitute for basic governance, declaring to the cheering thousands that citizens cannot eat a language, nor can tribal pride repair crumbling public infrastructure. In doing so, he aimed his critique straight at the seat of power, asserting that local leadership had abandoned its primary duty to the people. By confronting President Cyril Ramaphosa on his home ground, Malema transformed a local service delivery crisis into a broader challenge against the political legitimacy of the governing elite. This confrontational strategy has redefined the local electoral battlefield as South Africa approaches the municipal elections on the 4th of November 2026. The energy inside the stadium reflected a generation reaching its boiling point, exhausted by chronic neglect and demanding immediate radical change. Yet behind the thunderous applause of the stadium lay an unyielding political paradox that money and rhetoric could not easily break. The escalation was neither accidental nor sudden. On the 20th of May 2024, as the national election campaign reached its absolute peak, the political atmosphere inside South Africa strained under unprecedented pressure. Julius Malema stepped up to the podium before a crowd of tens of thousands in Johannesburg, his voice echoing across a stadium filled with a sea of red berets. He did not merely deliver a political address, he delivered an ultimatum to the ruling establishment. "We are not here to negotiate our existence," Malema declared to the roaring crowd. "We are here to claim what was promised and never delivered." The reaction from the African National Congress was swift, fierce, and uncompromising. Within hours, senior government officials convened emergency briefings in Pretoria, accusing the economic freedom fighters of attempting to destabilize the constitutional order. The political establishment viewed Malema's words not as democratic discourse, but as a direct challenge to the legitimacy of the state itself. In the streets of Soweto, Durban, and Cape Town, the public response split instantly along deeply entrenched socio-economic lines. For millions of unemployed young South Africans, Malema's fiery rhetoric represented the only voice willing to speak truth to power. But for business leaders, foreign investors, and suburban communities, his words sent shockwaves of deep anxiety through an already fragile economy. The tension reached its breaking point when police forces were deployed in high-density townships to manage growing political demonstrations. On the 25th of May, just days before the polls opened, security forces clashed with protesters outside a major rally in Durban. Tear gas filled the air, barricades burned in the streets, and over 45 political activists were detained in a single afternoon. International news outlets immediately broadcast the images worldwide. Headlines from Washington to London painted a picture of a nation teetering on the edge of institutional chaos. Political analysts openly questioned whether South Africa's constitutional safeguards could withstand such intense internal polarizations. Inside the halls of Parliament, the debate reached a fever pitch. Members of the opposition Democratic Alliance called for immediate legal injunctions against the EFF leadership, warning that inflammatory language threatened the peaceful transfer of power. Yet the more the political elite attempted to isolate Malema, the more his platform gained traction among those who felt entirely abandoned by 30 years of post-apartheid governance. This was not a mere dispute over election promises. This was a profound ideological battle over the very soul of South Africa's constitutional democracy. The ruling party found itself caught between the demands of foreign markets for stability and the urgent boiling frustration of a population demanding radical economic transformation. As the final ballots were prepared for distribution across more than 23,000 voting districts nationwide, the entire country held its breath. The ruling elite believed they had managed to contain the immediate crisis through security enforcement and public condemnations. But behind closed doors, hidden beneath official assurances of peace, a far more dangerous dynamic was quietly taking shape, one that would soon threaten the fundamental stability of the entire state. Beyond the soaring political rhetoric inside the Thohoyandou Stadium lies a brutal daily reality for ordinary citizens living across the Vembe district. The systemic breakdown of local government services has mutated from a mere administrative inconvenience into a full-scale crisis of human dignity. In many rural villages surrounding Thohoyandou, water infrastructure has collapsed entirely, leaving over 60% of households without a reliable municipal water supply. Families are forced to spend scarce financial resources buying water from private water tankers or collecting untreated water from local rivers. Electricity blackouts further paralyze small local businesses, while vulnerable pensioners receiving social relief grants are trapped in an unfair burden, paying exorbitant local fees for basic utilities. This ongoing misery provides the fertile ground upon which the Julius Malema Ramaphosa attack struck such a powerful emotional chord. converting everyday domestic suffering into an urgent demand for political accountability. This deep civic frustration exposes a fundamental conflict at the heart of South Africa's democracy, the battle between integrity versus corruption. For millions who watched the local government manifesto launch the primary grievance is not simply slow development, but the perception that municipal resources meant for the poor have been siphoned off by political elites. When local government bodies fail to maintain roads, clean streets, or operate 24-hour healthcare clinics, the public trust in democratic institutions erodes. The economic freedom fighters have seized upon this crisis by promising a complete overhaul of local municipal administration, asserting that clean governance and direct public employment are the only remedies for decades of institutional plunder. Now let us turn this story into a shared moment. Write in the comments where you are watching from your city, your country, your corner of the world. South African Dynamics would like to express our deepest gratitude to everyone, sending to each of you a heartfelt wish. May your journey be filled with dignity, hope, and light. Let the comments below become a map of connection across borders. Yet any rigorous political analysis must separate the dramatic momentum of a stadium rally from the cold mathematical reality of an election. The electoral numbers in the Thulamela local municipality reveal an enormous mountain for the opposition to climb. In the 2021 municipal elections, the African National Congress secured an overwhelming 85.18% of the vote, granting them 71 of the 81 council seats, while the EFF managed to win only 4 seats with 4.71%. This massive gap persisted in the national elections, where the governing party maintained nearly 90% support in the area. To convert stadium cheers into actual seats of power, Julius Malema requires nothing short of a political earthquake, a massive unprecedented turnout of young voters who historically abstain from municipal elections. How can a movement bridge the chasm between stadium energy and actual ballot box dominance, when decades of historical loyalty still bind the older generation to the ruling party? As local branches prepare for the municipal elections on the 4th of November 2026, the battle for Limpopo remains fiercely contested. The ANC relies on its deep historical roots, extensive ward organization, and the enduring loyalty of older voters who remember the liberation movement. The EFF, meanwhile, bets everything on a rising tide of youthful anger, insisting that history cannot fill an empty stomach. This local confrontation was no longer just a national dispute. It was beginning to send warning signals across international diplomatic corridors. The high-stakes political drama unfolding across Limpopo is no longer contained within South African borders. It is actively reshaping diplomatic calculations in Washington, London, and Brussels. Western intelligence analysts and foreign policy observers monitor the mounting tensions with acute concern, recognizing that the internal friction between the governing party and radical opposition threatens the fragile economic stability of Southern Africa. As South Africa navigates its complex government of national unity, Western diplomats fear that an aggressive surge by the economic freedom fighters could force the ruling coalition into unsustainable populist concessions. This intense national friction, dubbed by foreign observers as an escalating South Africa political crisis, poses severe strategic risks for foreign direct investment, international trade partnerships, and regional security alignment across the African continent. From the diplomatic corridors of the United States State Department to the headquarters of the African Union, international actors are closely analyzing how the ANC EFF election battle will impact the broader geopolitical landscape. For Western powers, South Africa remains a vital anchor of regional governance and economic infrastructure. However, the EFF's uncompromising platform, advocating for total land expropriation without compensation, nationalization of key economic sectors, and explicit alignment with anti-Western geopolitical blocs, signals a radical departure from established international norms. Foreign investors worry that if municipal administrations succumb to radical structural overhauls, long-term infrastructure contracts and international corporate holdings could face arbitrary state interventions. This external pressure exposes the delicate balance the South African government must maintain between satisfying domestic social demands and preserving international financial confidence. While international institutions demand fiscal discipline and structural economic reform, millions of impoverished citizens demand immediate wealth redistribution and sovereign economic control. The governing party finds itself squeezed between the exacting expectations of global capital markets and the fiery domestic populism championed by Julius Malema. As the political dust settled following the Thohoyandou rally, both parties found themselves standing at a dangerous crossroads where time was rapidly running out. As South Africa marches inexorably toward the municipal elections on the 4th of November, 2026, the nation stands at a transformative political crossroad. The fundamental struggle dividing the country is no longer merely an ideological debate between political elites. It is a battle between silence versus voice. For decades, millions of marginalized citizens in impoverished rural townships felt consigned to political silence, their daily struggles ignored by an entrenched political establishment. The rise of a fierce opposition movement has given dramatic expression to that long-suppressed anger, challenging the ruling party to answer for decades of unfulfilled promises and administrative decay. The strategic question facing Julius Malema and the economic freedom fighters is whether stadium fervor can be systematically translated into disciplined electoral power. Filling arenas with passionate youth demonstrates formidable narrative momentum, but municipal governance is decided by organizational discipline, ward-level infrastructure, and voter turnout. If the opposition succeeds in mobilizing millions of young citizens who traditionally abstain, it could fundamentally shatter the ruling party's historic dominance. Conversely, if youth enthusiasm fails to materialize at the ballot box, the governing African National Congress will once again rely on its deeply rooted rural machinery and older loyalists to preserve its grip on power. Before we close, let us pause. What you have just heard is not simply an episode of history, it is a reminder that sovereignty, dignity, and hope are still alive, waiting to be claimed. If this message has moved you, then subscribe to this channel, not because we ask for numbers, but because we are building a space where voices of independence are honored and where stories of pride continue to be told. By subscribing, you choose to walk with us into the next chapter of Africa's unfolding story. Subscribe and stand ready for the chapter that comes after this one. Ultimately, the struggle for South Africa's future rests upon the vote, the supreme instrument of civic sovereignty and moral accountability. Beyond the political speeches, the media battles, and the dramatic stadium rallies, true power remains in the hands of the people. Whether through historical loyalty or radical transformation, citizens across every village and township will decide who carries the responsibility of restoring national dignity. Because when the speeches end and the lights fade, the ultimate judgment will not be delivered on a stage, but inside the silent booth of destiny. What we have witnessed across the dust-choked roads of Thohoyandou is not merely a localized campaign rally. It is a profound political reckoning for the soul of South Africa. As the nation moves inexorably towards the pivotal municipal elections on the 4th of November 2026, the fundamental dispute between liberation history and generational frustration reaches its climax. The dramatic Julius Malema Ramaphosa Attack has exposed the deep fractures within the post-apartheid political settlement, forcing millions of citizens to question whether historical credentials can forever shield a governing party from systemic service delivery failures. The ongoing ANC EFF election battle represents a decisive generational pivot point. On one side stands a governing party anchored in liberation memory, rural branch networks, and institutional tradition. On the other, a restless, impoverished youth demanding immediate economic emancipation and structural accountability. Julius Malema's sharp critique of crumbling roads, rampant unemployment, and municipal corruption strikes directly at the heart of public outrage, converting daily domestic suffering into an urgent demand for national dignity. Yet the fiery energy of stadium rallies must ultimately confront the stern mathematical reality of the voting booth, where decades of traditional loyalty remain a formidable barrier. This fierce political contest, spearheaded by every relentless Julius Malema Ramaphosa attack, serves as a powerful reminder that democratic legitimacy can never be sustained on promises alone. True sovereignty belongs to the people, and genuine development requires transparent leadership, economic opportunity, and moral integrity. As South Africans prepare to cast their ballots, one crucial question remains for the future of the Republic. Will the electorate choose the familiar security of past liberation, or will they vote for a radical redefinition of their economic destiny?